turns out Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will still get paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing.
I'm here to tell my truth and make a shit ton of money out.
The lights dimmed, the room buzzed, and then it happened. A single spotlight cut through the haze, and Joe Koy strode onto the Golden Globe stage with the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. He smiled, casually, almost disarmingly. His body language was loose, but there was a glint in his eye that hinted at something sharper. Hollywood royalty, gathered in gowns and tuxedos, leaned forward ever so slightly. They expected a host's monologue filled with safe barbs, light-hearted observations, a few nods to films and shows. They weren't expecting a live detonation. And yet, within seconds, that's exactly what they got. Joe's opening rhythm lulled the room. He bantered, he grinned. He eased into the cadence of a comedian pretending to play it safe. But then, like a magician pulling a rug out from under the table, he dropped his first real strike. The line was simple, almost tossed off, but it sliced through the glittering air like a knife. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, he said, still getting paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing. The timing was perfect. The pause before, the punchline, the tilt of his head, the way his smile lingered as if he knew the blast radius it would cause. And then, eruption. The room cracked open with laughter, but it wasn't the polite chuckle of industry peers protecting each other. It was a visceral release, a roar. Champagne glasses trembled as people clapped harder than they meant to, letting out years of pent-up jokes they weren't supposed to say. Because here it was, at last, spoken out loud on one of the biggest stages in Hollywood. Meghan and Harry, reduced not to tragic figures, not to misunderstood outsiders, but to freeloaders cashing checks for simply existing. The camera panned across the audience, catching reactions like lightning in bottles. One actor nearly spat his drink. Another covered her mouth, torn between laughter and disbelief. You could see the flicker of thought crossing their faces. Did he really just say that? Is this allowed? For years, Meghan had been treated with kid gloves, her narrative tightly curated, her defenders ready to pounce on any hint of criticism. But in that moment, Joe cut through it with one clean swipe, and then he doubled down. Joe leaned into the microphone with that sly, almost conspiratorial smirk comedians use when they know they've found blood in the water. He compared the Sussex Saga to a dysfunctional soap opera, a show where every plotline circled back to self-pity and self-promotion. It was brutal, surgical, and mercilessly funny. The laughter grew louder, rolling through the room in waves. And Meghan, though absent, was suddenly everywhere, her carefully polished image splintering under the weight of a punchline. But Joe wasn't just telling jokes. He was playing the room like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every pause was calculated, every shift in tone deliberate. He let the silence stretch just long enough after each joke for the discomfort to settle, for the tension to tighten, and then, bang, he released it with another jab. The brilliance wasn't just in the words, it was in the control. He owned that stage, and by extension, he owned the narrative of the night. The audience's reactions told the story better than any critic could. Some laughed too loudly, as if trying to prove they weren't on Meghan's side. Others laughed into their champagne glasses, eyes darting around to see who else was laughing. A few sat frozen, their smiles thin, the kind of Hollywood mask that says, "I know this is funny, but I can't be seen enjoying it." Yet, even those silent ones betrayed themselves with tiny cracks, an involuntary grin, a stifled chuckle. Joe had cornered them. His jokes weren't just jokes, they were truths disguised as comedy, truths too sharp to deny. He mocked Meghan as the kind of person who makes every conversation about herself, the human embodiment of that friend who hijacks every story. It was a line so precise it hit like a dart to the center of a target. And again, the audience roared, not because it was mean, but because it was accurate. Everyone knew someone like that. Everyone had seen Meghan do exactly that, turning interviews and appearances into endless monologues about her own hardships, her own brilliance, her own struggles. Joe's genius was that he didn't need to explain it. He just held up a mirror, and the room recognized the reflection instantly. But the magic of the moment wasn't only in the punchlines. It was in the way Joe walked the razor's edge between comedy and danger. Each new jab felt like it might be the one that went too far, the one that would silence the room, draw gasps instead of laughter. That's what kept everyone on edge. That's what made the monologue electric. It was live wire comedy, the kind that feels unscripted, unpredictable, impossible to contain. And every time the tension threatened to tip into discomfort, Joe snapped it back with another perfectly timed release of laughter. There's a moment burned into the memory of that night. Joe had just landed a particularly cutting line about Meghan's Netflix millions, about how no one could quite figure out what exactly she had done to deserve them. The camera cut to the audience, and for a fraction of a second you could see the relief in their faces. They weren't just laughing at Meghan. They were laughing at the absurdity of the entire charade. Years of carefully orchestrated PR campaigns, endless speeches about authenticity, documentaries polished to a shine, all undone by a single joke on live television. And Joe wasn't finished. He pushed further, comparing Meghan's saga to The Crown, quipping that the only difference was that The Crown had actual writing and characters you wanted to watch. The audience howled. It wasn't just humor anymore. It was catharsis. For so long, people had tiptoed around Meghan, fearful of backlash, fearful of being labeled cruel. Joe broke that dam, and once it cracked, the flood was unstoppable. Minute by minute, Joe escalated. He layered his jokes, returning again and again to the theme of Meghan and Harry as Hollywood's most privileged freeloaders. The repetition wasn't lazy, it was intentional. Each callback reinforced the image, seared it deeper into the audience's minds. By the third or fourth strike, the crowd was primed to laugh before he even finished the setup. The laughter grew, looser, freer, like an audience realizing they had permission to enjoy what they'd been holding back for years. And Meghan, though nowhere near that stage, became the invisible guest of honor. Her absence was its own presence, felt in every nervous glance, every burst of applause, every joke that seemed to hang in the air a beat longer than expected. She wasn't just a punchline. She was the axis around which the entire monologue spun. Joe had transformed her into the unspoken star of the Golden Globes, only this time, she wasn't in control of the script. As the jokes piled up, the energy in the room shifted. What started as shock gave way to glee, and what began as nervous laughter turned into full-throated roars. The audience wasn't just reacting to Joe. They were feeding him, urging him on. And he responded, riding that wave, amplifying it, pushing the envelope further with each line. It was a feedback loop of comedy and catharsis, a cycle that left the room breathless. But here's the part that lingers. When Joe finally pulled back, when the monologue wound toward its close, the laughter didn't fade the way it usually does. It didn't settle back into polite applause. It hung there, charged, like static in the air. Because everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something different. Not a typical award show roast, not a fleeting joke destined to be forgotten. They had seen a cultural shift, a crack in the veneer, a moment where Meghan Markle's carefully protected image wasn't just questioned, it was dismantled in real time. And the brilliance of Joe's performance was that he never spelled it out. He didn't lecture, he didn't editorialize, he just told the jokes and he let the room do the rest. That's why it stung. That's why it landed. Because comedy, at its sharpest, isn't about exaggeration. It's about recognition. And that night, the world recognized something it had been trying not to say. That maybe, just maybe, Meghan Markle wasn't the untouchable figure she wanted to be. As Joe stepped away from the microphone, the applause echoed. But beneath it was something else. A tension, an unease, the sense that a door had been opened and couldn't easily be closed again. Because if Joe Koy could say it on the Golden Globes stage and the world could laugh along, what else might follow? What other truths, long suppressed, might finally find their way into the spotlight? The cameras cut away, the show moved on, but the moment stayed. It lingered, heavy and electric like the aftermath of a storm. And for Meghan Markle, wherever she was watching, or perhaps pointedly not watching, it marked something she couldn't spin, couldn't erase, couldn't curate away. A single night, a single voice, a single joke, and the illusion she had built began to crack. And the chilling part? That was only the beginning. Only the beginning. It happened in seconds, but the impact is still rippling across Hollywood, Britain, and every corner of the internet where Meghan Markle's name is currency. The Golden Globes, a stage where stars normally play it safe, became the scene of a cultural ambush. Joe Koy, the comedian chosen to host the ceremony, didn't just deliver a few harmless jabs. He walked into a room thick with champagne, ego, and expectation, and he detonated a bomb squarely at Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. The effect was immediate. The crowd froze, forks clinking midair, champagne flutes suspended in nervous hands. A-list actors, producers, directors, all of them turned like synchronized dancers to see whether anyone would dare laugh. And then the room cracked. The laughter burst, first cautious, then uncontainable. Because Joe Koy hadn't just told a joke, he had put into words what millions whispered behind closed doors. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, Koy said, letting the names hang with deliberate timing, will still get paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing. And that's just by Netflix. The words sliced the room like a knife. Gasps, stifled chuckles, and then a roar. The cameras caught the faces. The smirks of actors too polished to risk open ridicule, the half-hidden giggles of celebrities who knew the truth and loved hearing it said aloud. It wasn't comedy, not really. It was catharsis. A punchline that let the world exhale. For years, Meghan had tried to control her image with carefully curated documentaries, Oprah sit-downs, and Netflix specials polished within an inch of their lives. But with one line, Joe tore the entire facade apart. The Prince and Duchess weren't misunderstood visionaries, they were freeloaders. The power of the moment was not the joke itself, but its delivery. Koy leaned in, eyes narrowing, a sly grin, breaking across his face as if to say, "Yes, I really said that." The crowd erupted. You could feel the tension release, that collective sense of relief. Finally, someone had the courage to say it out loud. Meghan Markle, who had spent years trying to present herself as the wronged heroine, had just been demoted to a punchline. But Joe wasn't done. He doubled down, twisting the knife. Comparing the Sussex saga to a dysfunctional soap opera, he painted Meghan as the human equivalent of that friend who hijacks every conversation, turning the spotlight back onto themselves no matter the subject. His tone was casual, mocking, surgical. "You know that one person," he teased, "who makes every single conversation about themselves? Yeah, that's Meghan." The audience laughed louder, their reactions no longer restrained. Some clapped, others threw back their heads and cackled with unashamed glee. Because this wasn't just comedy, it was truth cloaked in humor. Koy had given the public permission to laugh at Meghan without guilt, without fear, without hesitation. And the moment he landed that punch, the floodgates opened. Let's be clear, this wasn't just a joke at an awards show. It was the first crack in the dam, the spark that ignited a cultural firestorm. Because the ridicule didn't end at the Globes. No, the Golden Globes became the staging ground for a full-scale roast that spread across continents, formats, and platforms. Within hours, clips of Joe's monologue were plastered across social media, dissected on talk shows, and splashed across tabloid front pages. The world wasn't just laughing, they were reveling. Meghan Markle, for so long untouchable, was fair game. And then came the pile-on. Spitting Image, the legendary British puppet show, smelled blood and went in for the kill. Meghan's puppet was a grotesque caricature, preening, fussing over designer outfits, obsessing over social media. Clout. "If I'm going to succeed in America," the puppet sneered, "I need a lifestyle brand of creams and supplements. Gwyneth Paltrow has Goop. Kourtney Kardashian has Poosh. Jamie Lee Curtis has Poogert. Now I've got mine. Meg Goo. Celebrating. The sexy earth goddess in all of us. Harry's puppet stumbled in behind her, clueless, fumbling with paperwork. "Do I put the royal seal where it says signature?" he asked, eyes wide with confusion. The joke wasn't subtle. Meghan, the power-hungry hustler. Harry, the dim-witted sidekick lost outside palace walls. British audiences ate it up. It was exaggerated, biting, and instantly viral. Overnight, Meghan and Harry weren't just controversial. They were cartoons. But America wasn't going to let Britain have all the fun. South Park unleashed their infamous episode, The Worldwide Privacy Tour. The animated Meghan and Harry marched through towns with protest signs, screaming about their right to privacy while simultaneously banging on every window for attention. The hypocrisy was turned into a running gag so sharp that it stung. Viewers didn't just laugh, they nodded. Because the joke wasn't absurd, it was accurate. They wanted privacy, yet they couldn't stop selling themselves. The contradiction had finally been immortalized in animation, replayed endlessly across the internet. Then came Chris Rock. On his Netflix special, he took Meghan's infamous Oprah interview, the one where she claimed to be shocked by royal racism, and shredded it to pieces. "She seemed like a nice lady, just complaining," Rock said, shaking his head. "Didn't she hit the light-skinned lottery?" The crowd roared, but Rock wasn't done. He zeroed in on her supposed naivety. "I didn't know how racist they were. That's like marrying into the Budweiser family and being shocked they drink beer." The laugh was explosive, brutal. Rock didn't just roast her, he exposed her. The audience wasn't just laughing at the joke, they were laughing at her. Simon Brodkin, the British comic known for skewering the powerful, turned the Sussexes' Netflix documentary into a personal playground. He mocked the sweeping drone shots, the melodramatic storytelling, the endless self-pity. "They were complaining about paying for their own security," he sneered. "They were very worried about their safety." Which I get. After 6 episodes, I wanted to attack them myself. The crowd howled. Brodkin had said what many thought, that the Sussex documentary wasn't a revelation, it was a tedious whine. Bill Maher weighed in too, dismissing Meghan's entire feminist narrative with a single savage line. "She's a lifelong feminist," he quipped, "as proven by marrying a prince and giving up her job." The audience erupted, half shocked, half delighted. In one sentence, Maher reduced Meghan's entire brand of empowerment to a hollow performance. And Nikki Glaser, she didn't just take a swing, she obliterated Meghan. "If she didn't marry him," Glaser said with deadly precision, "she'd be on The Bachelor this season. Meghan M. from Sherman Oaks. Barista." The line hit like a punch to the gut. The crowd gasped, then howled. Because it wasn't just funny, it was cruelly believable. Strip away the palace, the titles, the Netflix millions, and what was left? A woman no different from 1,000 others chasing fame in Los Angeles. By now, Meghan wasn't a royal, a philanthropist, or even a celebrity. She was a cultural punchline. The jokes snowballed, amplified by social media, replayed by talk shows, dissected by tabloids. Even silence couldn't save her. By refusing to respond, Meghan wasn't dodging the roast, she was letting it define her. And the damage was worse than personal embarrassment. In Hollywood, perception is everything. Once the public starts laughing at you, they stop buying what you're selling. Suddenly, the Sussex brand wasn't aspirational. It was absurd. Streaming executives whispered about Sussex fatigue. Producers questioned whether audiences wanted more content from 2 people everyone was mocking. Endorsements cooled. Invitations dried up. Because nothing kills faster in Hollywood than becoming the joke. And here's the most chilling part. Comedy sticks. A scandal passes. A headline fades. But once a joke attaches itself, it doesn't let go. Monica Lewinsky is still defined by late-night punchlines decades later. Prince Andrew is synonymous with ridicule. And now Meghan Markle has joined the ranks. No matter what she does, launch a brand, write a book, give a speech, there will always be someone in the back row whispering Nikki Glazer's line, she'd be a barista. Joe Koy's monologue at the Golden Globes wasn't just comedy. It was the opening volley in a cultural assassination. What followed, South Park, Spitting Image, Chris Rock, Brodkin, Maher, Glaser, wasn't just a roast. It was a trial. A collective verdict delivered not by judges, but by audiences who laughed because they knew it was true. And so the question lingers, unsettling and unresolved. Once the world has laughed at you, how do you make them take you seriously again? Meghan built her empire on image, on the illusion of control. But that control has been shattered, ripped away by punchlines sharper than any palace scandal. She wanted to be remembered as a voice, a leader, a symbol. But comedy has a different memory. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. It was just a monologue. Just a joke. Just laughter echoing in a gilded Hollywood ballroom. But in that moment, the laughter became something else. Something permanent. The laughter became the truth. And that truth leaves us with one chilling, open-ended question. When the laughter finally dies down, will Meghan Markle find a way to rewrite the story? Or is the story already written? That she was never the heroine, only the punchline. The punchline. This is Crown and Controversy, unraveling the royals, one scandal at a time. Don't forget to subscribe.